Think of how much of your life is devoted to making money and spending money. How much time do you spend making and spending money? Even if you don't make very much of it, you say, well, the making part isn't really there. Well, if you don't make much, still, all day long, you're spending money. You realize that? Either your money or someone else's money. You're spending money, somebody's money, every time you eat, or every time you take a drink of water, every time you use some plumbing or heating. You're spending around the clock. Even while you're sleeping, you're using up somebody's resources. Your whole existence is made up of making and spending money. No matter what kind of lifestyle you live, whether it's frugal or extravagant, money is a huge part of your life. We've been studying through the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a wisdom book in the Old Testament, designed to teach us how to deal with life in a fallen, cursed, feudal world. And we come to a section today in chapter 4 dealing with this topic of finances. Now, just a quick review to get you up to speed to where we are. The writer of the book, who refers to himself as the preacher, begins by warning us about the folly of trying to do the impossible, trying to get a hold of providence. If you put your energy towards gaining control of life so that you could be in charge of what comes your way, your life is going to be an exercise in futility. And so what he says to do is just don't do that. Just trust God. Trust God with the stuff that comes your way and enjoy whatever he brings. Enjoy life. Enjoy providence. How do you do that? By trusting God, fearing God, and living for his pleasure. That's what he said so far. That's the recipe for enjoying life. Trust what God is doing, and trust that what he's doing is always beautiful and good in its time. He controls everything, and he only does good things. But in this life, it's impossible to see that goodness. It's impossible to see so much of that beauty. So instead of wasting your time trying to figure it all out, just enjoy what God brings your way. So enjoy life, but always keep Judgment Day in mind, because the gift of enjoyment only comes to those who please God. That brings us up to where we left off in chapter 4, at verse 4. The rest of chapter 4, he kind of switches gears a little bit, and it sounds like something right out of the book of Proverbs. He gives us wisdom principles, and he does that because if you are going to live a life pleasing to God, if you're going to enjoy life by pleasing God, you have got to have wisdom. You're going to need it. Back in chapter 2, verse 13, he said, "There is an advantage to wisdom over folly, like the advantage of light over darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness." So we did see that wisdom and knowledge can be misused. If you try to use those to gain control of providence and gain control of life and all that, or figure out what God hasn't revealed, that's a waste of time, that's futility, but there is most definitely a place for wisdom. And so sprinkled all through this book are sections where he just stops and says, let me just give you some wisdom principles, some things that will help you make good decisions in life. One of the most important principles when it comes to making good decisions, living wisely, is understanding relative value. Now, this is very important. If you're going to try to make a hard decision, you have to know which things are valuable and which things are more valuable than other things. You have to know how valuable everything is in comparison to one another. If all you know is just which things are valuable, then that doesn't help, because most of the time when you're making a hard decision, the reason it's a hard decision is because you're trying to decide between multiple valuable things, right? If it's just between something valuable and something that's worthless, that's not a hard decision. The hard ones are the ones where you've got a lot of good things that you're deciding between. So in order to make wise decisions, you have to know not only what's important in life, but relative importance. Which things are more important than other things? Is your time important and valuable? Yes, right? Is your health important and valuable? Yes. So what if you have to make a choice between option A that will cost you a lot of time, but it preserves your health, or option B that'll harm your health some, but it'll save you a lot of time? You got two valuable things. You cannot make that decision unless you understand the relative value of time and health, right? Which one is more important? That's why when you read Proverbs, there's so many statements that, like, this is better than that, and this is better than that. because it's teaching us relative value. This is why when you're trying to make a hard decision, and if all you do is just write out a list of pros and cons, that doesn't help. If you notice, that doesn't really help that much, because you might have 25 pros over here and only 2 cons over here, but depending on the weight, if the 2 cons are significant enough, they might outweigh all 25 of the pros, right? And part of becoming a wise man or a wise woman is getting to the point where your natural impulses and feelings reflect the proper weight and value and importance of various things. Let me just give you an example of this, because this is just a very important principle. Suppose you're just getting done getting some errands, and you pull into your driveway, and you have some important documents in your folder, and you also have your little 2-year-old child with you, and you get out of the car, and a gust of wind comes up, and it blows your papers all over the yard, and at that very moment, your little 2-year-old runs out into the street with oncoming traffic. What do? Do you rescue your papers or your child? How do you make a decision like that? Do you whip out a quick a little whiteboard and draw a line down the middle and pros, cons, and you're mapping it all out? No, you don't have to do that. You can instantaneously make that decision. Why? Why are you able to make a wisdom decision that fast, that easily, without giving any thought to it at all? You instantly know the better choice is to save your child instead of trying to rescue your papers. Because why is that you know that? And the answer is, you understand intuitively that the life of your child is, the papers are important, no doubt about it, but the life of your child is so much more important than those papers that it's a no-brainer decision. It's a value difference that isn't just in your head, it's in your bloodstream. I mean, you just know this so deeply that you don't even have to think about it. It's a priority so clear that in your understanding, the decision like that does not require any thought at all. Now, are we ever going to get so wise that all our decisions are that easy? No. But the wiser we become, the more relative value of different things will be clear in our affections and our feelings and the way that we feel, and the easier it will be to choose the best option when we have to make hard decisions. If a person has to decide between 2 job offers, and one of them would be a much better job for them in their spiritual life, it would just, for spiritual reasons, it would just be much, much better. The other one, though, would pay a lot more money and would be easier. Well, in a decision like that, the wise person, that's the easiest decision in the world. I mean, that's a no-brainer. It doesn't even require thought, because in his heart, in his feelings, in his spiritual affections, his walk with the Lord is so much more valuable to him than ease or money. But for someone who's elevated money or ease or comfort too highly in his affections, or his walk with the Lord is too low in his affections, then this becomes an agonizingly difficult decision. And he might have to wrestle and struggle and seek advice and try and work it through and study and put all the energy he has into trying to make the right decision. Whereas the wise person, the decision is a piece of cake, because those priorities are proportioned right in his affections. Do you see that? A huge number of the problems that we have in life come from either undervaluing or overvaluing money in our affections compared to other things. And so the preacher is going to help us out here by teaching us how to value money the right way. You'll never live a wise life or make wise decisions if you don't understand where money fits in the list of priorities of life. You've got to know that. There are some things that are more important than money, and there are other things that are less important than money, and you got to know both. If those priorities are jumbled in your affections, you're going to run into all the same kinds of problems that fools run into in life. So in verse 4, the preacher starts with something that is more important than money. Now, we could go all day talking about things that are more important than money, right? That's not that hard. You can just scan through the book of Proverbs and you'll see all kinds of things that are more valuable than money. First and foremost, honoring God. Proverbs 3:9. Honor God with your money. So that's more important. righteousness and justice, godly speech, wisdom and understanding, truthfulness, humility, a good reputation, respect, a prudent wife. All those things, Scripture says, are more important than money. So when you make hard decisions, every single thing on that list should weigh more heavily in your decision-making than money should. It's foolish to overvalue money. Money has value, but it's limited. It's limited value. Money can protect you from some things, for sure, but not from everything. Proverbs 11:28, he who trusts in his riches will fall. So the value of money is great, but it's limited, and overvaluing money is going to result in disaster in your life. Lots of things are more valuable than money, but the preacher in this chapter is going to zero in on just one of them, one thing that's more valuable than money, and that is people. One of the most common mistakes we make is jumbling our priorities regarding possessions and money and people. When you come to the point where you love money more than you love people, when you love stuff more than you love people, your life will become futile and empty. Look at verse 4. Ecclesiastes 4:4. I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to a man's jealousy of his friend. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. The word jealousy there refers to hostility, a hostile attitude. When people have to work, a lot of times when people seem to have a really good work ethic, they're working hard, very often it's not a work ethic, it's just their desire to get ahead of someone else or to get something that someone else has. And that results in hostile attitudes. You see people your same age and they're making $20,000 or more a year more than you, and you think, I got to do something about that. Somebody's got a boat, or a car, or some cool truck, or whatever that you can't afford, and it ends up driving a wedge between you and that person. This is an ugly sin that we have. It's such a sad commentary on the human race is the fact that if you go into any corporation, one thing that you'll find is that all salaries are top secret, right? When you go to, the employer does everything he can to keep that information secret, because if the employees find out what the other employees are making, you're going to have a riot, right? The whole thing's going to fall apart. You can have a guy that's just happy as a clam making $18 an hour. But the moment he finds out the other guy is making $23 an hour, now he's up in arms. He's threatening to quit his job. I hate this place. I get, this is so unfair. But then if he finds out, no, the other guy's only making $18 an hour, then he's back to being happy. What is that? Why? Nothing's changed in his situation. He just can't stand the thought of somebody else's good fortune. It's just like the guy at work in the field in Matthew 20. He's perfectly happy to do a full day's work for a fair day's wage until he finds out that somebody else is getting the same money for fewer hours. Now he's unhappy. Why? Because envy hates grace. Envy hates grace. Our culture is all about fairness. We worship fairness. Everybody needs to get the exact same thing all the time. Fairness. And they value fairness. Our culture values fairness more than they value grace. Where some people get extra. I don't want anybody getting grace. I don't want anybody getting extra. I don't want anybody getting anything that I don't get. We're like a bunch of 5-year-olds. I mean, seriously, this is how children act. You give a kid a cookie, he's happy as can be. He finds out that you give his brother 2 cookies, now he's miserable with his 1 cookie. I really think one of the great tasks of parenting is to teach your kids to value grace above fairness. Teach them to rejoice with those who rejoice. Teach them that. When our kids were growing up, I purposely would sometimes give each one of them a cookie and then give one of them 2 cookies. On purpose. And just to teach them this. And I took the occasion to explain, this temptation you feel right now to be angry, that's called envy. And it's a bad sin. It's a bad thing. It's a really bad thing that'll hurt you in life. You've got to get that out of your heart. Love is very different from envy. Love is happy when someone else is happy. If you love someone and they're happy, you're happy. If your brother or sister gets something good and you don't get it, but it makes them happy, be happy for them. And honestly, you might think, wow, You could never teach that to a kid. It really wasn't that hard to teach them. They latched onto it right away. In fact, it even got to the point where it was kind of like a game for them. Anytime they saw somebody unhappy at somebody else's misfortune, they'd point, envy! They'd spot it. Envy! And just the other day, I was riding with Carol and Nicole, and she just mentioned out of the blue, she said, Dad, I'm so glad you taught us that, to hate envy. She went on to say, I'm amazed at how few people seem to know that. Everywhere I look, I see people who, they can't take delight in someone else's good fortune. It makes them miserable. And she was glad to have that virtue because she said, it brings so much more joy into my life. I mean, if you just think about it, if you can only be happy when pleasant things happen to you, then you can't be happy much of the time. But if you can be happy anytime someone else is happy, then you've got a lot of opportunity, right? Because we had a church of 350 people here, and something good is happening to somebody all the time, right? And so if you have the capability of rejoicing with those who rejoice, you can rejoice all the time. There's so much more capacity for happiness. Loving people more than you love stuff will make for a much, much more joyful life. But Solomon looked around and he saw the same thing Carol and Nicole saw. Hardly anybody seems to understand this. He said he looked around and he observed how much of a role rivalry and envy play in the workplace, and he found it to be pandemic. It's everywhere. When money becomes so important to you that you will sacrifice relationships, you'll place yourself in a hostile kind of relationship with someone else over money or possessions, then you have crossed the line into greed and coveting, and your whole life is going to turn into a big chasing after the wind. Proverbs 15:16 says, better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. It's not worth it. Proverbs 17:1, better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a full house a house full of feasting and strife. It's better to have a little piece of bread crust and have peace than to have strife in your house and feasting. You're going to be a lot happier in life if you have peaceful relationships and you're poor than you will be if you are rich and have strife in your house. Keep that in mind the next time you and your spouse get in a fight over money or a purchase. It's not worth it. It's not worth sacrificing something way more valuable. Taking the right path through life is dependent on making right decisions, and you will make right decisions when your priorities in your heart are set the right way. And one priority that must be just drilled into the frontal lobes of your brain is when you have to choose between stuff and peaceful relationships. Relationships are way, way more important. Peaceful relationships are more valuable in life than money, and they will bring you more benefits than money will bring you. And this principle applies way beyond just money. It applies to money and everything that's less important than money, right? Does that make sense to you? If relationships are more important than money, then relationships are also more important than anything down here that's less important than money. Right? Okay? So, what kinds of things would be less important than money? How about comfort and convenience? Every time the book of Proverbs tells us that it's foolish to be lazy and that we should work hard instead of just pursuing leisure and ease, isn't that saying money is more important than leisure and ease? Right? Why do lazy people sit on the couch instead of going to work? Why do they do that? Because they value comfort more than they value money, and that's foolishness. Right? That's a wrong priority. Money's more important than comfort and ease. On the scale of value, relationships are way up here, money comes here, and comfort and convenience are way down here, below money. And we'll see that in the very next verse. He's going to say that in verse 5. But before we get to verse 5, I just want to make this point. If comfort is worth less than money, then comfort is really worth less than relationships, which means if it's dumb to sacrifice a relationship for money, it's really, really dumb to sacrifice a relationship for comfort and convenience. See that? If you get angry or respond in a way that harms the relationship when somebody interferes with your comfort and convenience, that shows a really perverted priority in your heart. You're either valuing comfort way up here, too high, or you're valuing love relationship way down here, too low, or both. And so this section, what we see here is this section on money and valuing money above relationships. It's coming immediately on the heels of verses 1 through 3 about oppression. Remember we talked about that at the end last time. Oppression and injustice are always, there's a connection here. It's not just a new topic. Oppression and injustice are always the result of somebody valuing temporal things above people. Isn't that why oppression happens? And it's one of the worst things about this world. That's the thing that makes people wish they were dead, wish they were never born. So we need to press into our hearts the proper value of relationships and money and comfort. And so in verse 5, he reminds us that, yes, money is more important than comfort. Look at verse 5. The fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Now that's a graphic verse. It's the complement to verse 4. In verse 4, while the workaholics are just killing themselves to get money and they're ruining their relationships in the process, other people see that. They say, I'm not going to do that. That's overboard. I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to relax. I deserve a break today. In fact, I deserve a break every day. And they, up go the feet on the coffee table, and on goes the TV, and hour after hour is wasted forever, and they become a sluggard. Why do people do that? They do it because they value comfort and ease above money. And that's especially foolish when they do that because they don't even get the comfort. They don't even get the thing that they're treasuring so much. The comfort. I mean, do lazy people get comfort and ease? Not really. I mean, do people like that? When you see someone like that, do they seem to have a rested, rejuvenated life full of joy and health? No, they're depressed. They're always depressed. You start to feel like a slob. You start to feel like your life is pointless because it is. And the lazier you get, the harder work becomes. You don't feel rested. Have you noticed that? When you're lazy, the lazier you get, the more it gets so that simple tasks, just simple tasks around the house, become so daunting you can't even get yourself to do those. That's the Proverbs 15:19 principle. The way of the sluggard is blocked with thorns. The more you're a sluggard, the more lazy you are, everything gets harder. And so before long, you run out of money because you're not working, and your house falls apart, and you consume everything, and before long, everything's gone. That's what it means by he consumes his own flesh. He's like a cannibal. He's just eating his own arm. He's just eating himself to death. Because you can't stop consuming. You still need stuff, but you don't have any money coming in. So it's just as it's foolish to overvalue money, it's also foolish to undervalue money. Scripture has a lot to say about the value of money. Money is very valuable. It's more valuable than a lot of things. Money is a gift from God. He gave it to us for our enjoyment. Ecclesiastes 5:19. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift from God. That's important. Ecclesiastes 7:11. Wisdom is as good as an inheritance. What does that imply? An inheritance is good. Verse 12, because wisdom is protection as money is protection. Money is a protection. It can protect you from all kinds of threats. Proverbs 10:15, the wealth of the rich is their fortified city, but poverty is the ruin of the poor. If you have money, you can be protected from starvation, protected from freezing to death in the cold, protected from having to go without things that you need. Money can, in some cases, even protect you from injustice. Proverbs 13:23, a poor man's field may produce an abundant food, but injustice sweeps it away. So, if you don't have enough money, you become vulnerable to injustice. So you can have a great year financially, but because you're a poor person, somebody else can take it away, and you can't do anything about it because you can't afford a good lawyer. Proverbs 19:7 says that money can protect you from being shunned by people. In Ecclesiastes 10:19, money answers everything. I mean, I think the point of that verse is, of all God's gifts, money is the most versatile. It's got an answer for everything. You can be used for anything. You can use it to worship God. You can use money to win the lost. Luke 16:9. You can use money to take care of your family, to acquire things, to hire help, to influence people. Money can even be used to calm anger in Proverbs 21:14. Money is incredibly versatile stuff. It's a powerful, powerful tool that God gave us and expects us to use for His purposes. And if we do, it can pay great, eternal dividends. We need to work hard because money is important. If you undervalue money, your life will become futile. And if you overvalue money, your life will become futile and end in self-destruction. So in verse 6, he gives us a perfect sweet spot between overvaluing and undervaluing. Verse 6, he says, better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort and a pursuit of the wind. So the guy working too hard, he gets two handfuls. He's loaded. He's got a lot of money. But he's chasing the wind, and his life is miserable because there's no rest. The lazy guy, he gets plenty of rest. He's got all kinds of rest, but he's got zero handfuls. He doesn't even have one handful. He can't even pay his bills. So if you want to enjoy life the way God intended, get a job, work hard, earn your handful that you need, then stop working, go home, and get some rest. And invest yourself in relationships. That's the model. Now, you read verse 6, you think, that's a little easier said than done. I mean, aren't you oversimplifying this a little bit, Darrell? I mean, making decisions about how many hours to work, it can be very complicated. This can be a hard decision. That's true. I mean, it's the simplistic preacher who would stand up in a pulpit and say, don't ever neglect your family for work. That's not helpful. Because people who deal in reality, people who actually have jobs, know that if you're trying to support a family, sometimes you've got to stay late and you've got to neglect your family for a time. Otherwise, you risk losing your job altogether. It's just the way things are. And I'm not trying to suggest that these things are easy and these decisions are easy. They're just simplistic, and you just say, oh, people are more important than money, therefore every time there's a decision involving people and money, I'm always going to choose people over money. You could never earn a living if you did that. Many decisions we face are agonizingly difficult. But what I can tell you is this. Those hard decisions become less and less difficult the more biblical priorities of relative values find their way into our bloodstream, into our affections. Some decisions are really hard just because God wants them to be hard. He wants us to face a hard decision. But other decisions are hard only because of our priorities getting skewed and we don't have the right strength behind the good desires. And so a huge part of gaining wisdom is getting to the point where your feelings change so that your priorities reflect biblical priorities and they fall into the right slots by themselves. And to help us with that, the preacher is going to, what he wants us to do in the rest of this chapter is point us to the immense value of relationships. He doesn't want to just give us the principle like he already did. He wants it to affect the way we feel. And so he's going to give us several examples just showing us the value of relationships compared to career success and money. So let's go to verse 7. Again, I saw futility under the sun. There is a person without a companion, and even a son or brother, and though there is no end to all his struggles, his eyes are still not content with his riches. And so he says, quote, so who am I struggling for and depriving myself from good? End quote. This too is futile and a miserable task. So we see nice cars and really fast cars and really cool trucks and really bigger house, and we see jewelry, and we see new clothes and all the stuff at the mall, and we $6 coffees and eating out more and more and more often. And instead of getting our greed for luxury and comfort under control, we just work more hours. We just buy everything we want to buy, and we just work more hours. And it's standard practice these days to buy a car that costs more money than you have in the bank and just finance it. Just do what the federal government does. Just spend money that you don't even have and just assume it'll be there in the future. I mean, it's not there now. It wasn't there in the past, but in the future, surely it'll be there. And we get so many payments. We got our house payment and the car payment and credit card debt payments and payments for TVs and payments for appliances and all these payments. And we stack up so many payments that we got to get another job and work even more hours, and work overtime, and find some more income just to cover all the payments. And so we work, and we work, and we work, and the income goes up, but the spending goes up even faster, and we get farther in the hole. and in a bigger mess. And finally, we're working so many hours we have no relationships. And the relationships we do have are strained to the breaking point because we're so stressed out about all of our finances. And your spouse and your kids and your friends get so little of your time and your attention. When they do get your time, they don't have your attention, and so the relationship just dwindles to nothing. And your wife is always on your case about working so much, and all your other relationships fall apart, and it's causing nothing but problems. And finally, one day you break down and you ask, who am I struggling for and depriving myself of good? For what? I mean, I say no to recreation. I say no to sleep. I run myself to death working all these hours. And for what? All the people I'm working for are mad at me for how hard I'm working. This too is futile and a miserable task. Why? Because relationships are more important than money. Is money important? Yeah, but not as important as relationships. If you go through life living as though relationships are no big deal, you're a fool. And he goes on in the next paragraph to give us several reasons why relationships are so important and valuable. First, verse 9, because they're valuable, because a lot of tasks in life require more than one person. Verse 9, two are better than one because they have a good return or a good reward for their efforts. There are some tasks that are just fine for an individual. Two people doing it, it doesn't really matter. You get double the output for double the man hours, and it's not that big a deal. But there are other tasks in life that if two people do it, they can get 5 times more done than if one person tries to do it, or if two people try to do it, separately. And if you're doing those kinds of tasks alone, just because you weren't willing to put forth the hours and invest all the hours and the heartache and the trouble to maintain relationships and friendships, you're being a poor steward of your time. You're struggling and you're doing stuff alone that God never intended you to do alone. You've got a calling. God is expecting you to accomplish some things in this life. He's expecting you to get them done. And in order to get them done, you're going to need some help. You're going to have to be wise about maximizing efficiency. And some tasks are actually more efficient when they're done alone. But other tasks, you got to have help. And they're much more efficient with multiplied people. And very often, in order for those tasks to be done well, you not only need those people, but you have to have a certain kind of relationship with those people in order for it to be effective. Just to give you an example, God has called me to lead this church as one of the pastors. I can't do that job the way God wants it done without the help of 4 other pastors and the deacons. And just having those pastors and deacons around isn't enough. If my relationship with them goes sour, what happens? Well, first, communication breaks down, and from there, everything becomes inefficient. We become like oxen yoked together, but pulling in opposite directions, and all we do with all our energy is wear each other out. And nothing gets done. So relationships are crucial for your calling. Secondly, relationships are important for when you fall. Look at verse 10. If either falls, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. There are failures in life that God designed us to need help recovering from. We're all going to stumble. We're all going to have failures. If you don't take the time to maintain relationships and friendships and your marriage and all the rest, then there's no one there for you in those times when you need recovery. You need help for recovery. This is especially true of people who allow work to keep them from fellowship. And I realize there's some cases where a person has no choice. Man has to support his family, and his employer is saying, you work Sunday mornings, or you find another job, and there is no other job, and so he's stuck having to miss church for now. That happens. I understand that happens, but very often it's not a matter of necessity. It's a matter of just priorities. And the boss is pressuring you to work on Sundays, but it's not an absolute necessity. I just don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation with my boss, so I'll just give in. One of the things that gives me joy in life is to see my kids working hard. I love the fact that they've turned out to be hard workers, and over the years, they've all found various jobs, and especially Nikki, she's worked a lot of jobs, and with all these jobs that they've found, none of them have ever had to work on Sunday mornings. And that didn't happen just by chance. It happened because when they apply for a job, they just said, I'm absolutely not available on Sunday morning. That you need someone on Sunday mornings? I'm not the person for this job. And that's it, period. And sometimes they had to go a while to find a job because of that. Some employers tried to make them work on Sundays after hiring them, and they made it clear, no, if that keeps happening, I'm going to have to quit. They followed the wisdom principle that says fellowship is more important than money. And all of them, with that ethic, have been able to find work and have made plenty of money. And yet they manage to maintain strong friendships and are deeply involved in fellowship and ministry in the church. And so when they stumble and fall, they're surrounded with people who can help them. Climb out of the ditch that they stumbled into. They've got friends who can take them by the hand and get them back up on their feet and get them back on the path. So, valuable for recovery from failure. Verse 11 gives us the third reason, value of friendships. They're valuable because he says, also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person keep warm alone? So you can keep each other warm. Now that actually almost seems to defy logic. Not sure I understand this. If it's cold and Tracy and I try to stay warm by snuggling together, why does that keep me warmer than just being alone by myself? It doesn't seem to make any sense because yes, I'm receiving body heat from her, but I'm also losing body heat to her, right? I mean, whatever she gets from me, I'm losing, and whatever I get from her, she's losing. So it seems like it would just be a wash. I don't understand the physics of it, but all I know is it works. Somehow, we end up both getting more than we lose. And I'm not sure how that works, but you might think, okay, well, that's not an issue for me. I've got an electric blanket, Understand here, he's not just talking about staying warm. It's a general principle about combined resources. Relationships are supremely valuable because there are so many cases where combining resources can create a symbiotic kind of a relationship where you each supply what the other one is lacking in ways that make both of your resources pay off in greater ways. So it's more than just the whole is more than just the sum of the parts. Again, God has called you to do something in His kingdom. You have a calling, and you have to play a role, and you're not going to be able to fulfill that role unless you maximize your resources by multiplying those resources through relationships. Maybe God gave you the gift of knowledge, and you've got that. But in order for that gift to really have its effect, to really get out there and have an impact, it's got to be combined with compassion from that friend over there and zeal from this friend over here. And that's the recipe that's really going to make this thing fly. And if you put all those ingredients together, the combined influence is going to be way more than just the sum of the parts. You're going to have a ministry 100 times more powerful than if all three of you are just operating on your own. So, combined resources. Fourth reason relationships are important. Verse 12. If someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. You take a thread, just a typical thread, and you can easily just break it, right? And it's amazing how if you take that and just triple it, just take 3 strands of it, you can't even begin to break it. Seems like it would be so easy, but you can't. And the point there is there's safety in numbers. If you maintain your relationships, that protects you from all kinds of potential harm, not just a mugger or somebody attacking you physically, but from all kinds of threats. If you really if you get real sick, you're going to need good friends. I remember when Tracy got pregnant, each time, all 3 times, she had such extreme morning sickness. The whole 9 months she had it, and it was so extreme she had to be hospitalized. And so when our third came along, when she conceived Josiah, she was so sick she couldn't even begin to take care of Faith and Nikki. She couldn't even hold them. And I was, at that time, trying to support the family. I was delivering pizzas, working an hourly job, minimum wage. I couldn't take time off. And we didn't live anywhere near family at this time. But we got by. And you know why? It was because Tracy had cultivated some wonderful friendships with women at church who it was such close friendships, they would come over to the house and take the girls for the day, that whole time. Friendships are hard. They're heartbreaking. They're agonizing. They will cause you a lot of sorrow. They'll cause you a lot of consternation and trouble. But there are times when threats come into your life and you need a network of friends to survive it. And that is worth every penny of the consternation that relationships cause you. They'll protect you from threats. It might be a financial threat. You know, sometimes a real calamity hits and you're in desperate need, and it's more than just one or two friends can help you with. But if you surrounded yourself with a whole church family of people who know you and love you and they're involved in your life, then they can help carry you through a time like that. It might be a time of discouragement and depression. It might be a crisis that requires wisdom beyond the wisdom that you have. And your best friend doesn't have the wisdom, and neither does your other friend. But if you have enough friends, somebody will have the wisdom you need. There are all kinds of dangers and threats in life that God never designed us or equipped us to be able to handle on our own. It's just not his plan. But if we get so caught up with making money and chasing after possessions and involving ourselves with stuff or comfort or ease that we neglect relationships, we're sacrificing treasures that are worth immeasurably more than the money that we're so in love with. And that's foolishness. If you don't have strong relationships, being rich is not all it's cracked up to be. And neither is being famous or powerful in the world's eyes. And that gets us down to verse 13. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer pays attention to warnings. Or literally, who no longer knows how to receive teaching. He used to be teachable. He used to be humble, but now he's reached the top, and he's older than the people around him, and he's got more experience than the people around him, and he's no longer teachable. He used to be humble, verse 14. He came from prison to be the king, even though he was poor in his kingdom. He was born poor in his kingdom. I mean, it's an amazing success story, rags to riches, obscurity to fame and power, great story, until he ruins it by becoming unteachable at the end. Verse 15, I saw all the living who move about under the sun follow a second youth who succeeds him. There is no limit to all the people who were before them, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. See, you're better off to be a wise nobody than to be the most famous and powerful person in the country without a teachable spirit. It's such a sad thing to see this happen, and it happens so often. There are people in the church with so much potential to do great things, but it's mostly wasted because their pride comes in and makes them unteachable. Every conversation with them is them instructing you. It's always them giving their opinion. And it never occurs to them that maybe this person I'm talking to might actually have something for me to learn from. And they get so puffed up with their own knowledge that they can't learn. Or they can only learn from certain people, certain big shots, people with more formal education than they have, and that's it. And so they get more education. The more education they get, the fewer people they can learn from. Finally, they get their PhD, and they look down their nose at everybody, especially at this poor, farmer that's got an 8th grade education. And yet that farmer's learned some things in life, some lessons on the farm that this guy could really profit from if he just open his ears and listen, but he can't receive it from somebody who has poor grammar. And so eventually he misses out on what he's supposed to learn. Eventually he becomes a fool because there's so few people that he's willing to learn from. It's really, you say, is this a new topic here? No, this is the same issue he's talking about all along. It's valuing lesser things above relationships. Whether it be money you're valuing above relationships, or education, or fame, or power, or comfort, or ease, any of it. All that stuff is going to get you nowhere if you sacrifice relationships. Well, the preacher has a lot more to say about money and finances later in the book and even in the next chapter. And we're going to get that as we go. But for now, let me just leave you with this. What percentage of your income should be set aside for honoring the Lord? What percentage? 100. Right? Isn't that the right answer? 100? 100%. Every dime you spend and every dime you save should be spent or saved for the purpose of bringing glory and honor to God. Everything. Everything you ever do. And so what you do with your budget is very, very important. It's eternally important. Your goal should not be to just find a way to pay your bills. It should be to bring pleasure and glory and honor to God, not only through the way that you earn and the way that you spend, but also through the priorities in your heart of the way that you value money in comparison to other things that are less important and more important. And I know from experience that in a group this size, there is no doubt a large number sitting in this room right now whose finances are a mess, right? And you're not honoring God with your budget. It's chaos because it's not lining up according to wisdom principles that we have in Scripture, and it's interfering with your relationships. It's interfering with your worship. It's interfering with all kinds of things. And you may not know this, but we have some counselors at Agape who have spent a great amount of time studying through what are all the biblical principles that Scripture gives us about money and compiling them, and they're willing to just sit down with you for a few weeks, however long it takes, and walk through those principles, make sure you understand all those biblical principles, and help you set up a budget that will reflect those principles and will bring this kind of blessing into your life that God designed for money to bring when it's right in the right slot, when it's in the right priority slot. And all you'd have to do is call the office and set up an appointment. And it's free. I just want you to know that. But whether or not you take advantage of the free counseling or you do it on your own, let's all make it our goal to bring pleasure to God with our finances in the year 2014. Okay? Let's pray. Father, seems like kind of an earthy topic to be preaching on. We like to talk about your glory. We like to talk about worship and all these things, but money's not an earthly topic for the Christian. We know, Lord, that we can bring pleasure to you, or we can bring displeasure to you through it, and that makes it a holy thing, a holy object in our hands. Lord, teach us to honor you with our money. We pray this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. We've got a little bit of time left here before we dismiss. Questions? Gabe?